Hello there, it's me, Sable. I'm your host of Full Out Healing, where I dive into my healing journey. Now, every episode, there's a theme and a topic, and I talk about how I relate to this theme or topic in the past, how I relate to it today, and what I'm hoping and desiring for the future. Now, this topic, I didn't know how much I needed to know the existence of this topic until I heard it once in a support group, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's where all this shame is coming from. And today's episode topic is today's episode is called Shame and Not Being the Perfect Survivor. Okay. And I'll dive into I'll dive into it now. So in the past, what's crazy about this concept is that I fully had an understanding of it, was judging myself against it, and yet had no consciousness that this was even a concept that I held, right? So in the past, I thought the perfect survivor was someone who leaves the first time at the first sign or instance of violence or disrespect. I thought the perfect survivor is someone who's abused by a man, a straight man. And I also thought the perfect survivor tells someone when something goes off in the relationship. And not only that, I thought that the perfect survivor, because they tell someone, that someone helps them see things differently, and they leave as a result of that new sight. I also thought that the perfect survivor is someone who is, explicitly controlled. And when I say this, literally, when I say this, I mean it's the only way that power and control looks like in the relationship abuse they're experiencing is you're allowed to do this. Like, they get explicit rules and directions. Don't do this, only do that. That's what I thought control that's what I thought control looks like, or the only way control could look like. Not only that, I thought that the perfect survivor recognizes disrespect in real time and has consciousness about it in real time, and that they choose to ignore it or put it away, but whatever they choose to do with it, they recognize disrespect in real time. Also, I thought the perfect survivor doesn't know anything about their financial information because the abuser is the one who controls it all. And I also thought that the perfect survivor was someone who never traveled, has never been exposed to different things in the world. I thought the perfect survivor was someone who, I guess, not necessarily didn't have a career, but I thought that the perfect survivor, like that, yeah, kind of, because in my mind, there's no way someone who has an established career, there's no way that someone who is out in the world doing things could be a survivor, right? And so I think that is kind of revealing that I thought the inverse of that was true. I also thought the perfect survivor was physically weak, physically smaller, and I also thought that the perfect survivor is physically locked away, where like they literally don't have permission to see people at all. Now, that in my mind, all of those things, that's what I thought survivors were. And I didn't recognize it was perfect until as I was kind of walking this journey, I realized all of the ways I was kind of shaming myself for not being a survivor in the right way. And, you know, before I had consciousness around it, I just felt deep, deep shame. Like I felt so ashamed because I wasn't any of the things on the list that I just mentioned. I thought that, you know, it was my fault, that I am the one to blame. And I couldn't not, and there's like a whole nother world and depth of shame related to blame as well. I also just felt stupid. Like I literally remember thinking like, Sable, you are so fucking dumb for being in this situation, for not seeing it. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, I was so mean to myself for being in this situation. Like, there's just no other way to describe it. And I felt like an idiot. Like, and I know that's not a feeling word, so maybe those are more thoughts I had. But I couldn't help. I just felt so stupid. I also, as a result, I felt incredibly unworthy of compassion and support and resources, because I felt like, well, I don't really count as a survivor, because by that definition of being a perfect survivor, like I don't fit the bill. And which is kind of a great segue to the narratives I used to hold about survivors, or about the perfect survivor. And one of which was that real survivors, they exist in true crime, in TV, in dramas and Lifetime movies, and real survivors exist within the context of straight relationships, or like heteronormative, straight relationships, which basically meant that real survivors are only in the mainstream. They're not like in the margins of society. Well, the violence is very marginalizing, but like they fit certain boxes that means that they're considered when they experience abuse, right? Which was really interesting narrative, because I remember watching Big Little Lies. I think that's what it is, with Nicole Kidman, and there's a central storyline around domestic violence. And side note, I love Nicole Kidman and everything she chooses to do. Solid actress. And also another side note, this is why, you know, when people can control their own stories, and it's just, I actually won't go on this side note because it's a pretty big one. But I remember watching Big Little Lies, and I remember watching it with my ex-wife, and I remember and at the time I would not have identified as a survivor. I would not have used language that would describe our relationship as abusive and violent. And yet I remember watching that and feeling like heat rising right here. I felt constricted. I felt like I almost stopped breathing watching it. It was overwhelming. I felt so exposed. Even though on paper I couldn't be more different from the main character. I felt so exposed, and like I had no skin, but in the worst way. And part of me, I remember it was almost a sense of panic, because I was like, I knew that if we had talked about if there were any connections to what we were watching, that it would be mean bad things for me. Or it would be, I wouldn't have said bad things for me, I would have said it would have been a bad night. And I remember asking her to pause it, being like, I need a break, this is a lot. And I remember assuming that she would need a break too, because I guess I assumed, well, she would feel exposed by watching this. But nope. She was fucking fine. Like, I think she was also I think mildly, I think she thought I think she was mildly surprised that I was so affected by watching this. But I say mildly because she also seemed unbothered by it. And kind of, I don't remember exactly what I said. I do remember saying something to the effect of like, I'm gonna need pauses. And I remember her sort of, it was weird. It was like she was responding compassionately to the fact that I needed pauses, but without any recognition or acknowledgement as to why I would need those pauses. It was almost as if like it was a different person who was not a part of the relationship, who understood the context of violence I was living in. It was almost as if like a friend or like, you know, a new acquaintance was offering that like compassion and support. It was weird. She was totally removed from it. But yeah, back then I thought, you know, real survivors are not a part of, they're over there, they're in the mainstream. It was kind of, I think to some degree I had kind of othered myself or just felt so other because I'm a Black queer woman, because I own my own business. I have like my own career. Like there were just so many ways, which I even feel like, ooh, I don't even like saying that out loud, but I think I did judge myself for those reasons. And so I don't like saying it out loud, but I'm gonna say it because it's full out healing and that's what we do here. I think another narrative I held for myself is that in line with that is that I am so pathetic. Like I thought that I was pathetic because I wasn't the perfect survivor, and yet clearly I'm, you know, experiencing violence in my relationship, and I felt like I just felt pathetic for allowing it. Like that was sort of the narrative I told myself. It was particularly when I first left and I first came to terms with and I first accepted, oh my God, this is what was happening. There was a lot of that emotion and that story. And to be honest, like I kind of had to, like, there was a period of time where I just had to sit in a discomfort of that self-judgment and feeling dumb and stupid and pathetic, because suppressing that hadn't done me any good. I think those things kind of cropped up in moments of intense violent conflict where there were points throughout the course of the relationship where I tried to leave, attempted leaving, I was done, and these thoughts I'm realizing kind of function as like a cage, because in the doneness of it all, I was then confronted with all of these judgments. And there were a lot of things going on that played into my decision and also my ability to leave versus not leave. And just self-judgment and self-shame and shame is just such a powerful force, and that was definitely at part. Another narrative that I held for myself for not being the perfect survivor is that I am an imposter from stealing help from the people who need it. And this is somehow this idea coexisted with the fact that there were several times throughout the relationship where I would, do like text messaging with the DV hotline, and I would speak to different like crisis counselors, explaining them the situation. I realized part of me was, I remember asking, like, am I overreacting? Like, am I being dramatic? Like, this isn't real abuse, is it? And none of them ever said that. They were like, yeah, this sounds like power and control, or like, they're trained. They had a way of responding to me that kept me engaged, but none of them ever validated any of these narratives I held about myself that resulted in me judging and shaming myself. Like, none of them, And so that's which is to say, like, because those narratives and constructs, they were just so strong that it made it really challenging to accept new information that could contradict it. Like, I wouldn't integrate it into my understanding because of that deep core belief and understanding, which leads me to the beliefs I held at the time. I believed that I should have been able to recognize what was happening as it was happening. I believed that I should be embarrassed by what that says about me, that I didn't recognize it in real time. And what I believe, and I thought I should be embarrassed because that would reveal that I don't love myself and I don't respect myself. And like, how pathetic is that? Like, that is legitimate. I legitimately believe that. And I also, and this is the part that made it so hard to even imagine talking to people who I know in my mind, like, I know care about me. I believe that, and I'll say this, I now recognize that this was like a projection, but I believe at the time, I believed that people would judge me and that people would see me as less than and not like fierce because I allowed this to happen. So much of as I'm sharing this, I'm realizing so much of not being the perfect survivor, it kind of created a doorway of really inappropriate amount of responsibility for like the violence that I was experiencing. And so that's how I used to think about, not being the perfect survivor. Now, here's what I think about that. Now I understand that the perfect survivor is a construct that lets society off the hook. I cannot tell you how many dozens and hundreds of hours in my life I spent in this healing journey in support groups, and none of us are the perfect survivor. No one feels like the perfect survivor because that shit does not exist. Okay? There's always something that I said or did, or they said or did, or that a survivor said or did that makes us not perfect and therefore not deserving of attention, care, and support. It's all a hoax. It's a fucking lie. There's no such thing. No one is the perfect survivor. That does not exist. I also now understand that, unfortunately, abuse is equal opportunity, okay? People of all genders, of all sexual orientations, of all class levels, of all lived experiences, abuse people they're in relationships with. It's not just men. It's not just straight guys that are abusing people they're in relationships with. I also recognize that I now look back and I'm like, wow, shame and unworthiness, that is the great silencer and the great isolator. I recognize that I had a limited, a severely limited capacity to speak to what was happening to me because of the shame and the blame I took on. Like it's just not, shame is just so silencing, and it's not, I don't think it's possible to be able to break through shame in the context of ongoing violence, and in the context of ongoing unsafety. Even when I started going to support groups, it was only, no one speaks the first time, or I never spoke the first time. It was only once, I heard other people's stories. I thought, oh my God, like, have they been a fly on the wall in my life? Why do I relate to everything that you just said, even though I don't fucking know you? It was, and once I heard that and I saw myself and I heard other people's compassionate responses, and then I heard my own compassionate response, it was only once I had that safety that I was like, you know what? Next time in group, I'm going to say this dreadfully embarrassing thing that I am so ashamed about. And it was only when I said that very shameful thing and I heard all the Me Too's, I was like, oh my God, this is legit what Me Too means. That I was like, whoa. Oh, only then did the shame start to, that was the doorway to start to deconstruct the shame. And yeah, but I'm saying all of which is to say that I have compassion for that version of myself that wasn't able to speak up. She didn't have what she needed to do that. And that doesn't make her a bad survivor. I also know and understand that the way power and control is used within the context of abusive relationships is not what a Lifetime movie makes, okay? There are ways to establish and maintain power and control that are implicit and invisible. For example, and also, oddly enough, physical violence is the part that endures. It's like a fraction, but the memory of it sort of it's just a constant threat and a constant undercurrent. So everything that is said and done is done in the shadow of that violence, right? And so it's never just, a question is never just a question, a statement is never just a statement. It's oh wow, if you take this a certain way, or if I don't do this, could it lead to that? And like the fear of what you know is possible and are afraid to imagine what else could be possible also functions in that, I also think that the way we think about power and control in relationships, it ignores different mediums. Like there's not just ways of being physically violent. You could be emotionally violent, financially violent. There's just like so many different levels of violence. And that one thing that I fucking hate and that frustrates me is how the criminal justice system defines like a threat, right? And like you see this in trends of how when people stand up to their abusers, they're considered like, it's not considered self-defense because there isn't an imminent threat of violence, which I think is bullshit. Like there is a constant threat of violence, whether or not someone is like raging at the moment or, peacefully asleep, because that's the point of the violence. You never know, right? And oftentimes once the violence has been triggered, it's really hard, like in the midst of it, to like be able to protect yourself. But I digress. Another thought that I have about this concept of the perfect survivor, as I was just getting into it, violence is not just about physical strength, it's also about opportunity. Now, this is something that I felt ashamed about because, I'm a tall person. Like, I'm 6'2", and my ex-wife was like, I don't remember exactly, like 5'7", maybe 5'8", was like physically smaller than me, right? And so that's something, like, another reason why I felt ashamed. Like, I'm a big person, I should have been able to like not let this happen. There's that blame again, right? But as I sat down and I reflected about it, I realized it about violence not just being physical strength, but opportunity. And I realized, oh my God, almost every single time that like she physically attacked me, I was like in bed, sitting down on a couch, or somehow physically lower than her. Like, that's why there were like broken bed frames and chairs, because that's when she attacked me, is when I was like physically taking less space, right? And so I think that in society there's a way of thinking about physical violence that just looks at people's bodies and think, oh, well, it's obvious who has what advantage. And I just don't, just based on my own experience, that's just not true, because violence is also about the opportunity to be violent. And particularly when people are abusive to their partners, opportunity actually means a lot, because there's they choose to be violent with their partner when no one is around. Like, that's an opportunity, right? Like, there's just layers and layers of opportunity. And that's why I think that's another important way to consider and think about violence and when it happens, how I feel about it now, the idea of the perfect survivor, it still makes me really upset, because I'm amazed by it. It really is a horrible psychological cage. It was a cage for me, and I think it's a cage for survivors. Just the idea that there's a perfect way to be in this, and being outside of that perfection means it's your fault. Like that, and it's just so, it's so dangerous and isolating, because I'm getting ahead of myself, and I might end up repeating myself, but it delays. I know for me, because of the ways that I didn't feel like I was a perfect survivor, that delayed the amount of time that it took for me to recognize what I was experiencing, and then also like get the appropriate amount of help, right? Because I didn't feel like I counted. So narratives that I hold now about this are, 1, real survivors are everywhere, and each and every single one of them are worthy of support and compassion, regardless of how imperfect a survivor they are. Point blank, period. When I say everywhere, that means they are in our schools, our banks, our institutions, in your book club. Survivors are everywhere. They are surviving now, or have survived, and are, they're everywhere. We're everywhere, y'all. A narrative I now hold is that, I was really lost. and also really fucking courageous. And I did the absolute best that I could with what I had. And I'm now in a place of growing and constant self-compassion with myself because of that. Like I no longer judge myself for not being able to do something that I didn't have the tools to do, or that I just didn't know how to do. And some in that spirit, I now know, like, I am worthy and deserving. I am worthy and deserving, period. I am worthy and deserving of help. And most importantly, and this is a big one, because I literally remember talking about this in support groups and with my therapist about this and my different counselors. Like, this happened. I am not, and I was not over dramatic at all. Like, this happened. And that sounds so simple. And for a long time after I got out, this was hard for me to accept, because I felt like an imposter, and I still had there were a lot of narratives from that relationship that, like, still had internalized, that I had to, like, unpack and dismantled. And I think that's something that at first I was like, oh shit, like, damn, like, I had left the relationship, but all of the constructs and the beliefs and all of that stuff that kept me in it, like, I brought with me, because they were in my mind, they were in my body. And so much of the healing work was about, one, making them visible, bringing them into the light despite the shame, and slowly unpacking and dismantling and forgiving and holding and loving and releasing all of that. Now I believe that it was really, instead of being like, wow, I should have known better, I should have recognized this in real time, I now believe that it was genuinely hard for me to recognize abuse as it was happening to me, because at my core, I felt unworthy and undeserving. I also had, which also lent itself to an incredibly unsafe inner world, which that was my constant, that was familiar. And not only that, I was conditioned as a burden, like, throughout my life. I felt like those things. And so it's really hard to recognize abuse when those things are true about you, when you have an unsafe inner world, when you don't feel worthy, and when you feel like a fundamental burden. Abuse doesn't register in the same way, because in some ways it affirmed these really dark things that were within me, that didn't honor the truth of who I am, and that didn't honor my light. And that's what made it hard to recognize, I also recognized that I didn't have additional tools that I would need to recognize abuse. I, first and fundamentally foremost, I didn't have a relationship with myself that included awareness of my needs and feelings. My relationship with myself, it was unconscious. I'm not going to say it was non-existent, because even that's a relationship with yourself, but it was so unconscious. I didn't hold me and have space for me. I just didn't have a relationship with myself. And, like, you absolutely need that in order to be able to recognize when that same self is experiencing abuse, is experiencing things that aren't good for it. Another tool that I needed to recognize what I was experiencing but didn't have was I didn't know what safety felt like. Like, I really didn't. And so, which when I realized this, it made me actually really sad. I was like, wow. Because I tried to think about when did I feel safe, and I couldn't. I kept going back on the clock of Sable's life, and I couldn't think of anything. And it made me really sad because then I got to a place where I was sitting with little Sable, and I realized, wow, this little girl doesn't know what safety is. And that made me really, really sad. And and it made me sad, but then I was also, grateful for the opportunity to recognize that, because has become a priority in my life, making sure that little Sable is safe and that I'm doing things that ensure that she's safe all the time. But, how was I supposed to recognize abuse and harm if I didn't even know what safety looked like, right? I also believe that I am a strong woman who has been through some shit, and I am now in my not today, not ever Satan era of life. And it feels good to say that and to own that. And there are people in the world who really admire and respect that. I admire and respect that of me and of every survivor I've ever fucking met. Every single one. They're strong people who have been through some shit, and they are entering their era, and the world better fucking watch out. I also now recognize that my people, they really respect me. They love me. That has been a constant. And not only that, they've been able to recognize the truth of who I am and have never denied it. Even when that was a big question mark for me in my life, that has never been a question for them. And for the future, so yeah, we're almost wrapped up. So I would say for the future, it is my most sincere hope and desire that the archetype of the perfect survivor dies. I hate that shit. It feels like such a perfect, insidious projection of all of society's judgments about the nature of abuse is, of course, projected onto a survivor, right? So I just want that archetype to die. I'm ready for the cultural revolution that will cause that death, and hopefully Full Out Healing is a part of that. I also desire that for myself, and really for you and every other survivor in the world. And even if you don't identify as a survivor, if you literally relate to anything that I'm saying, fuck the label, who cares? To replace judgment with self-compassion. Like, it's such a deep desire, because there's freedom on the other side of that self-compassion. And judgment is just, I know it kept me suspended in where I was. And, I had to move through it and all that, but judgment is a place of suspension. And my other desire is that, I really desire that every single survivor in the world, they are given flowers for their strength. Like, it's time. They deserve their flowers. They deserve to give themselves their flowers. I hope that you deserve to give yourself your flowers. I hope that your people gives you those flowers. And I also, I hope that society, steps it up as, I have to say it because I also happen to be a massive Drag Race fan, and so that's just something to know about me. But you know, I hope society steps its pussy up and gives survivors their flowers. And I hope, yeah, I hope the world and society does that too. So yeah, that was episode 10. Ah! I did it. We did it. How wonderful. Episode 10 of Full Out Healing. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Bye, y'all.